Hello, and everyone. Welcome to Smart Company, the podcast. I'm your host, Dave Dory, and I'm joined, as always, by my co-host and tech expert, Grace Schroeder. Today, we welcome Ken Schmitt to the show. Ken is the co-founder of Ascentria Search Partners, a leader in the high-end executive talent recruitment and so much more. Ken, if you could all, just to start things, get things going a little bit, tell us a little bit more about what your company does and the story behind the creation of Ascentria Search Partners.
Sure. Yeah, no, I'm happy to. Thanks a lot for having me. It's nice to be with you, Grace and Dave. So thanks for the invitation to join you today. I'm based out here, and as we were just chatting about offline in beautiful Southern California, I'm in San Diego. So it's a nice place to be most of the year, which is great. I've been in the search business now for 28 years recruiting. I actually got into the industry answering an ad in the paper back when there were newspapers and actually ads in newspapers back in the very, very late 1990s, and fell in love with the industry. And just as a lifelong learner, I just love the fact that I get to meet so many great people and have great conversations and learn about their style of leadership and management and running a business. So Ascentria Search Partners is actually the combination of two firms. I was running Turning Point Executive Search for 18 years. My business partner, Sean, she was running Calabri for about almost 15 years. And we've been referral partners and colleagues for a very, very long time. And finally, as of May 1st of this year in 2025, we joined forces. And so our goal is to provide really kind of access to top tier talent, the best impossible candidates out there, to middle market, mainly privately held companies, without these companies having to spend a gazillion hours of their time finding people, and B, not having to spend a gazillion dollars either going to a big name brand firm, because we've done all the research and all the sourcing and screening on their behalf at a much more effective price point and a much more effective and efficient process.
Fantastic. Tell us a little more about some of the verticals you had mentioned. I think private equity. Tell us about some of the verticals that you really focused on in your career and with Ascentria, and why would that be?
Yeah, we work across a pretty wide variety of sectors. We tend to be more specialists on the functional side. So we have clients that are in technology and software and SaaS, as you might imagine, but also a lot of clients in what's called the AEC space, architecture, engineering, construction. A lot of companies in that area, and then a lot also on the manufacturing side. So those three sectors represent about 80% of our clientele. The other remaining amount is a combination of CPG and biotech and medtech and the like. But where we really specialize and where our niche really happens to be is on the functional side. We don't try to be all things to all people and just fill every job under the sun. Our focus is really around C-suite and operations, a lot of accounting and finance, and then marketing as well as sales. So kind of those key functional verticals, if you will, across all those sectors that I mentioned.
I have a question because I'm always very interested in the human side of everything, and technology would be really fun without the humans, but unfortunately,
I don't know about that.
The biggest challenge of anything is like, how are the humans going to respond to it? How are they going to... What are you seeing? Anything? What we're saying is like domain expertise is the new IP. And I see a need for, more mature executives with fabulous domain expertise to guide companies through this AI evolution, because they know where the bodies are buried, what the evolution needs to be, what are the big workflows that are driving the most cost or have the most opportunity, what are the workflows that are at risk because God doesn't make people that know how to program in Fortran anymore. So what are you seeing? I'm very curious to hear what your clients are looking for and what the challenges are.
Yeah, that's obviously a very big question. How much time do we have here, right? But I think in terms of, I guess I would say, first of all, this is very similar to, several other, big advances in technology or in terms of regulation as well, where people will say, we need somebody who's been doing this for a long time, who's really mature, as to use the term that you used, Grace. But the reality is we're coming up on 3 years, right? When ChatGPT really exploded the visibility, but also the need to really kind of integrate AI, or at least, generative AI into your everyday life. So there really aren't anybody that are quote unquote mature, 15, 20, 25 year veterans of generative AI. So I think that's one of the challenges out there is you see these job descriptions and these companies saying, we've got to hire somebody who's a really seasoned veteran in using this and applying this to our business. When the reality is it's 3 years old, or at least the adoption that we know today is only 3 years old. So I think that's the first thing I would say. That's a challenge. Second, I would say, again, as a business owner myself, and as someone that's also entrepreneurial like the two of you are, it's easy to go to a conference or do a podcast or read something and think, oh my gosh, generative AI is the next big thing. We got to figure out how to put it into our company. How do we leverage this and get the most out of it? When the first question should be, okay, here's what we need as a business, or question should be, what do we need as a business? And then the answer becomes, okay, can AI be part of that? And I think a lot of companies that I run into are doing it the opposite way. They're saying, we got to use the AI. And people are saying, okay, for what? Looking around the business saying, well, where do we use it? So the question is, what are the gaps? Like with any technology or tool or even a human being, and hiring somebody, what gap are we trying to fill? What solution are we trying to solve? What problem are we trying to solve? And do we have things today in place already that are doing a great job? Or do we need something brand new? Or can AI just kind of maybe amplify or accelerate, that effectiveness? And so I think those questions have to be answered first. And that's not always the way it goes, unfortunately.
Yeah, I wonder if you've seen any of these play out, because I have seen several examples of, okay, I'm going to hire the head of AI. And that never seems to go well, because it's not the head of AI that you need. It's your entire organization learning how to interact with, refine, adapt, manage, co-work with digital agents. And it's not a single human that can come in and go to 15 conferences, to your point, and come back with the presto, here's the answer, sort of a solution.
Yeah, and I think it also depends on the industry, right? It's like people always ask me, so Ken, how's the job market? And I'll say, well, compared to what, right? What are we talking about here? It's never a one, kind of a binary question. It's good or it's bad. A lot of times in the media, you read about things and they always try to, whatever the subject matter might be, they try to distill it down to one catalyst. One thing caused whatever it is we're talking about. When the reality is it's rarely one thing or even two things. It's usually kind of a confluence of things happening all together. And I think technology and AI is a great example of that as well. We are seeing, for example, AI being adopted in some industries, technology in particular, retail, supply chain, organizations and industries that are very capital intensive in terms of equipment. But in my business as a recruiter, yeah, we certainly use it. We use it kind of around the edges to help us create content and refine content. Is it going to help me to recruit and screen a CEO better than I could have done 3 years ago? No. Will it help me to find that person a little more quickly? Sure. Yeah. So there are certain aspects of the recruiter job that technology and AI can certainly help accelerate. But to your point earlier, Grace, it's not going to replace the human in the loop, as I call it. We still need to have that human aspect contributing to that as well. So I think it is, a sector by sector, function by function question versus one blanket kind of a response or approach.
And I think when you bring up human in the loop, in my own personal experience, I've seen AI perform dramatically better when there is a human in the loop, when they have, to constantly create those kinds of guardrails or reassurance or additional information, and that really does amplify that. So in your estimation, how has AI changed what companies are looking for in their higher C-suite type personnel? How has that changed now in this era of AI?
Great question.
I think it's a matter of the understanding of, or maybe not, kind of just familiarity with, right? If you're hiring, like you said, Grace, if you're hiring a head of AI, first of all, you better make sure that you really need a head of AI. Is there really that much opportunity in your company that you're going to have a whole new C-suite, function dedicated to it? That's the first question. But I think in terms of what companies are looking for, it's somebody that is, I hate the term digital native is just so overused, but somebody who really understands the technology and how it can be applied. And either that they've taken courses, they've done something online, they've had a job in the past where it required that, or they're finding ways to really learn as they go. The individuals, like when I started recruiting 28 years ago, so many functions were still very siloed. Sales and marketing is a great example. Marketing did this, and this, and then stopped here, handed the leads off to sales, and sales took over. It was a very linear, very, very much kind of an us versus them, and they would throw daggers back and forth, to one another. Sales would say, "Oh, you marketing people, you always give us crappy leads," and marketing says, "Oh, we give you tons of great leads, but you guys do nothing with them," right? It was very, very siloed. These days, so many functions, if not all of them, is much more circular, much more collaborative. And I think that's where AI comes in. AI isn't just one, or technology in general, is not just one stop along that continuum. It is injected in 17 different areas. And so the companies that we work with that are hiring people through us want somebody who understands, okay, here are some areas we can maybe use AI and technology and inject that into our process to make us more efficient, more effective. And let's make sure that we're not coming into this cold, that we have that knowledge base. But I think, and whether it's technology or anything else, our clients are now asking us for people that have a broader mindset. If they're a sales leader, for example, they don't only work in that sales silo, but they also understand and respect and can collaborate with marketing and product development and operations and IT, right? If you're a CFO and your job obviously is to save money and cut costs wherever you can. However, you've got to have a strong relationship as a CFO with your CRO, your chief revenue officer, because you're doing the same thing. You might be two sides of the same coin, as they say, but you've got to work in concert and collaborate together. It can't just be all about cutting numbers on the CFO side, and it can't just be all about we'll spend whatever we have to spend just to get more revenue in the door. It's got to be a blend of the two. So our clients are looking for people that have the proven ability to have that kind of dual mindset outside of just their own functional area.
Yeah, and I've noticed, because I'm no spring chicken, is that the breaking down of the silos in whatever technical disruption is really where the messiness happens. So I was at a telecom when voice over IP came out, and then you had the network side going at the data side, and at the voice side, and in between the two did not meet, and orders were dropping in the cave between the two, and then you also, with systems, you have ERP that was always the back of the house, and CRM was the front of the house, and then the internet came along. It's like, hey, I want to do my sales and my service. Now I've got to have a way to talk. So those are also sort of, I think, elderly categories that need to go away. Like, what is an ERP if it's not also a CRM? It makes no sense. So I think those people that are able to join across organizations and see the end to end, even without having experienced a leadership role in operations, but they know the importance of it. I think there are big careers, for people that want to undertake that transformation. And it looks like a lot of fun too.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, it's also, and as again, a kind of a cliche, but that tone at the top is really important in today's business world, right? What are the key, drivers, factors, areas of expansion opportunities that are being driven and that are being really, kind of amplified by senior leadership? We do a lot of work at the C-suite and board level as well. And I'm very involved with the Private Directors Association, a group that's focused around middle market, private companies and their boards and how they run that. And we're having conversations now around, whether or not boards need to have an AI, leader or an AI expert as one of the board members, or do you just look for board members now that not only have their functional, expertise, but who have also done some work and understand AI. But again, I think that tone at the top, at the board level, if you have one, if there's no board at the company, then, at the obviously C-suite level, is that senior level team driving home the importance of AI and technology in general? Are they talking about more modernized, more progressive ways of running their business? Or are they stuck in their old ways and they just ignore everything out there, and they end up being somewhat antiquated, and the kinds of employees that they attract are also not very progressive, not very, kind of tech forward, if you will. So that tone at the top is really important to get the right people on board to truly move the business forward. And things are moving so much faster these days than they were even 5 years ago, pre-COVID, never mind, 20 years ago. You've got to adapt and you've got to change things up, or you're going to be obsolete very, very quickly.
Well, it always seems that, people get obsessed with the specific tools or the hot new AI functional app. And when the actuality, that's going to change. That's always going to change almost by the week. Whereas to have someone who has that kind of fluidity and progressive mentality that can always be an ambassador to that bridge to the AI technology, I would imagine would be essentially one of the key things they're looking for. Would you say?
Definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, for sure. Yeah,
Um,
without a doubt.
I have to ask you something about that. This is always something that would have to be I would imagine one of the tougher things to assess as a talent recruiter when you're trying to make that perfect match is a company's culture. Like, how do you actually assess that without being in the break room for 5 years? Like, how do you make that match? How do you assess that company culture?
He has cameras, Dave. He just can't say
That's
it
right.
on a podcast.
Exactly right.
Ken's a quick one. That's right. I forgot that. That is
it's not
true.
a button. It's an actual camera. I walk into my clients and look around. Right.
Right.
It is. I mean, it's a great question, and I would say two things. A, we have an expression in recruiting that people join companies and they leave managers, meaning they join the organization for what the job is they're going to do, for what their what the excitement around the organization is. But the reality is, the manager that you're reporting up to has a huge say in whether or not you're happy. And part of that is not just the technical side. How do they lead? But what is the culture of that manager's department? What kind of environment are they creating for all the people that are in that department? So culture is really important. It's a hard thing to pinpoint and quantify, but it's really a matter of, how does the company operate? How do you feel when you're there? Is it and we always ask these questions when we do our discovery and our kickoff calls with clients that we're doing recruiting for. Tell us about your communication style. Is it more email? Is it more texting? Do you use Slack? Is it everybody has to be in the office 5 days a week, so it's 100% on site and that's face to face? And again, there's no right or wrong answer. We just want to know, what is your style of communication, so that when we talk to candidates, we can make sure that they're also aligned with that style. We talk about things like, okay, what do you do outside of office hours? Do you have, what are the benefits like, for example? If the benefits are set up in such a way where it's obvious that they don't think about any employees who are in their 20s, it's only a healthcare plan focused on people that are in their 50s and 60s. All right, well, that's part of the culture. They probably have people that are working there predominantly a little bit more mature. So that's another indication. Culture is also around, tenure. You can, with LinkedIn these days, it's pretty easy to figure out what is the average tenure like at a company. If you're a VP of marketing and you're going to interview at ABC company, you can go into LinkedIn and do a search for all the people in marketing at that particular company and figure out what is the average tenure. If different roles are turning over every 6, 9, 12 months on a consistent basis, something's probably broken about the culture.
You're just feeding people into the wood chipper.
Exactly right. Or there's some misalignment happening, or like I said before, the manager of that department is doing a horrible job and senior leadership is not willing to let that person go. They're keeping them there. They're a bad apple leading a team, and it's causing all the superstar A players to leave because of that. That's another part of culture. Are you a company where you're pre-IPO, or you're about to orchestrate an exit? You're a private equity owned. In that case, you're probably working 50 hours a week, right? Yeah. So maybe it doesn't make the most sense to hire a brand new parent who has a newborn at home, or somebody who has to take care of their elderly parents on a regular basis. Not that you can ask those questions, but you want to make sure that you're communicating that to the prospective employee that you're hiring in terms of what's expected of them. Or is it more of a easygoing company where you have every other Friday off, which again is not a bad or a good thing. It's just part of the culture. So those are all the little data points along the way that you kind of added together, give you a picture of what it's like to work at this organization, to make sure you're aligning the new person coming in through us with their existing infrastructure.
Well, Ken, if I could just a 2-word advice on company culture, 2 words, pass it on to your corporate clients: foosball table. All right, foosball table. Make sure. I worked at a company for 5 years, had a foosball table. Who's going to walk over and just start playing foosball? In this day and age of layoffs and things like that. No, I think it was probably a test, like to see, Yeah. But anyway, Grace, I think you had a question.
I got a question.
In the heady days of technology, you had massage therapists that were on site, care on site, which was great. Foosball tables, ping pong, basketball. I mean, to get people there. Now they're doing whatever they can to get people to come back to the office, because I'd much rather be at home with my own creature comforts than go hang out by the football table.
Yeah.
Bring your dog, wear your pajamas. That's what they need to do.
Right. Very true.
I sort of wonder if, Ken, if you aren't sort of a key leading indicator of the pace of change and realization. So are you seeing a situation where companies just sort of lumber along and they're like, holy shit, now we're behind. Let me go find these people to get us on this path. Or are people steadily sort of going, okay, I know I need to do this? Are they in denial? Where do you think the business is today?
Yeah, I mean, I wish I could say different, but in the 28 years I've been recruiting, it's almost always been the same, where most companies are reactive. They are filling a position because somebody left the post. Someone got promoted, or they left the company, or retired, or whatever. And so it's a very reactive kind of a role usually. Now, there are certainly, companies like Amazon that they know every year around October, they're going to have to ramp up dramatically for their seasonal holiday needs, right? So they're going to hire 5,000 people. So that's a little more proactive, but it's also, very seasonal, very cyclical. But for the most part, companies don't do as good of a job as they should in terms of maintaining a pipeline. If you have a bench of great people that you're not able to hire right now, but you're in just ongoing conversations with them, they're at a competitor or an ancillary industry, you've met them a couple times at a trade show and you've been really impressed, just keeping that open dialogue going is so much more helpful so that you hit the ground running when it does come to time to hire somebody new. That's really important. But for the most part, companies are usually more on the reactive side. In terms of us being a leading or a lagging economic indicator, it's changed so much over the years as well. It used to be that when the economy was not doing very well, then people would get laid off, and then the temporary market would be strong because companies weren't quite ready or willing to commit to a full-time employee, so they hired temporary people instead, and that was an indicator of that. And then as direct hire began to pick up, that was a sign that, okay, the economy is getting better, companies are getting a little bit more comfortable, if you will, in the visibility of their overall business. They have that confidence level. Now they're going to commit to direct hire. It's not quite as linear of a correlation as it used to be, though. I heard somebody on CNBC recently talking about last year, and they used the term, it was a no hire, no fire year, which I thought was a really great way to sum it up. Companies weren't firing a lot of people. There weren't a ton of layoffs. It didn't spike to any kind of a toxic number, but there also wasn't a ton of hiring going on outside of frontline positions and healthcare, hospitality, food, that kind of thing. So there were a lot of jobs that were being left unfilled. And so that was, you would think there would be job openings going on and numbers rising because of the jobs that were being vacated, but it wasn't the fact. So it really is more of a kind of evolving or kind of, like I said, less of a linear correlation these days than it has been in the past. Overall, I would say right now the market is better than what it was last year. There is more hiring going on. We work, like I said before, we work in the private company, middle market space, a lot of private equity ownership and a lot of family offices. And because of the cost of capital and because of interest rates being so high and the IPO window and M&A being lower, if you will, a lot of these companies that bought these organizations as a 3 to 4 year investment are now having to realize, all right, we're going to have to hold this company for 5 to 7 years. Yeah. And the leadership team we have in place was great to get us from point 1 to year 3, but getting us to year 6 or 7 is probably going to be a different leadership team. And so we're seeing some of these private investor groups come in and say, we need a new CRO, chief strategy officer, CEO, whatever it might be, to get us through the next couple of years before we can actually go back out there and sell the company at a profit. Versus what they thought the timeline was going to be originally.
Do you see a lot? Do you see a lot of companies? Well, it's always said there's a lot of. You would be a more of a knowledgeable person on this, but it would seem that there's a lot of liquidity in terms of like the buying and selling of tech-related companies, because a lot of these guys who started these companies in the late 70s are now at the age where they want to retire, they want to sell. And is there ironically a hindrance or a lack of desire to bring in AI overhauls because they're looking at the exit and they don't want to deal with that? They want, someone else to deal with it?
Yeah, I mean, that's part of it for sure. There are definitely those leaders out there we talk to that say, I don't want to go through, another round of having to cycle up, if you will, or kind of upskill their own knowledge base. There were a lot of people that were ready to get out of the business, and sell their business in 2020 and 2021. And that was their plan. And going into 2019, they thought, all right, my 12, 24-month plan, I'm going to sell the business. Well, obviously COVID hit, and that just, threw everything, under the bus. So they had to wait a little bit longer. Then we had 2021 and 2022 where valuations went through the roof. We had SPACs, we had M&A activity that was just crazy. There was the Great Resignation. People were trying to hire left and right. So there was a lot of companies being sold in that time frame. And then that window just collapsed. It just closed shut at the end of 2022. It's come back a little bit this year, but last year was a record low for any kind of private or any kind of M&A activity out there, and for IPOs as well. So I think to your question, Dave, I think there are more leaders, more founders that are now getting back to that realization. Okay, I do want to get out. There's going to be another wave of technology company coming. Am I really ready? Then do I want to stick it out and go through that next wave, or is it time to sell? So we're seeing that for sure. Part of the challenge, though, this is I know a bigger conversation, but is that the expected valuations of on the part of the seller, of the founder, are still elevated. They're expecting to get a pretty hefty valuation for their company to sell it because of how heady things were in 21 and 22. And a lot of PE firms say that's nowhere near the reality of what we're going to pay for your company. And so founders are sitting on their companies a little bit longer, hoping valuations will come up again. So I think, things are going to get better. Hopefully we'll have a little more clarity around tariffs one way or the other in the next, let's say quarter or two. We'll see if that does have a trickle down effect in the economy, which will affect pricing, which will also affect the source of, all these supplies and all these materials for a lot of these companies in the manufacturing space. So that could potentially, kind of help or hurt the M&A world. But I think things are going in the right direction. And when there's M&A, when there's companies being bought and sold, that creates churn and the need for more people as well, with or without technology.
And there's so many different variables at play. Sorry, go ahead, Grace.
I have another side question. As you go through and try to help these companies, sort of engage this next generation of leadership, or engage a generation of leadership that can help them on this AI path, do you have like a series of indicating questions that you ask that would tell you, yeah, that person's probably going to work out, or that person's probably not?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the answer is yes. And it's a lot of, the term behavioral interviewing has been big for a long time now, where rather than saying, the worst question you can ask anybody in an interview is, so tell me about yourself. Because it tells you nothing about whether they're the right fit for that job. It's just ridiculous, right? So you want to be talking about, and you don't even want to say, you don't want to just ask somebody, well, tell me about when you did this, right? Because even that's a little bit, hard to compare apples to apples. Instead, you want to say, at our company, when we launch a new marketing campaign, we're leveraging 3 different outside marketing agencies. We've got a spend of about $500,000 to $600,000 typically. We do a lot of A/B testing to figure out the right marketplace. Tell me about some experiences you have running that kind of a campaign in that kind of an environment where you're very hands-on. You don't have a huge team to rely on. It's really you and maybe 2 other people, and we had to also leverage outside agencies. So you're really, as an interviewer, trying to gauge the person's fit. You should be providing a context around the question. Here's how we operate as a company. Then asking the question, give me a couple examples of where you have operated like that in a similar kind of a company. And technology is very similar, right? You could ask the question about, where we are now at the early stages of integrating generative AI into what we do on the marketing side. I keep using marketing, but it's the easiest example. On the marketing side, and we're doing this, and AI is helping us to create content, and we're then tweaking it and customizing it and obviously editing it. Tell me about some situations you've been in where you've had to not only research, but also adopt and then integrate, actually implement a new technology into your regular process, into your regular workflow. And you're asking those questions. If they really struggle to come up with more than one example, then they're probably not as innovative as they say they are. And we always ask for 2 examples because it's relatively easy usually for the candidate to kind of figure out or to talk about one particular example. But when you ask them for 2 examples, now they're having to really dig and see, all right, was that one example a one-off, or is that really part of how they operate on a regular basis? So those are the kind of questions you can certainly ask, especially around technology.
So Ken, a term that always seems to always pop up is employer brand or employment brand. Tell us about what that is and why that's so vital, would you say?
Yeah, it really goes back to kind of the discussion we had about culture, right? Your employer brand, everybody thinks about their brand in terms of what are their products or services that their company offers. And that's their brand in terms of their offerings. But a lot of companies fail to think about what their actual employer brand is. In other words, what is it like to work for you as an employee? What are you as an employer providing to your employees that makes it a compelling place to work? And I think we spend a lot of time with our clients talking about what is your employer brand? How do you consider yourselves as an operator? What kind of folks work out well here and which ones don't? When you're hiring somebody, where do the more successful employees come from? And so in our discovery and our work on the recruiting side that we do, we are spending a lot of time with these companies helping to define the employment brand, and then also to then kind of integrate that into the job description and telling them about things that are really compelling that will attract a superstar, a player. That's a big part of our process. And that's probably one of our bigger differentiators, is not just being what I call an order taker, where a client says, here's my job description, go out and find this. That's not what we do. Instead, it's a partnership. It's a collaboration. We're going to give them insight and feedback on what we find in the marketplace, on compensation, on levels of experience, whatever it might be. But we're also going to try to help them with their employer brand and with them defining what it's like to work at that company, so they can do a better job, even on their own without using us for other positions. They can do a better job of attracting and retaining the right level people.
Fantastic. Well, Ken, listen, thank you so much for joining us. Truly insightful. There was so much to consider there.
I can talk to you all day.
Yeah, we really could. But thank you so much for joining us. And of course, everyone watching, thank you for watching Smart Company, the podcast. All the best, and we'll see you next time.